Call this meeting to order. Commissioner Aaron Todd, would you like to lead us in the pledge of allegiance?
Sure. Right hand over here. Ready to begin? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have roll call?
Vice Chair Cameron Carrizales,
Present.
Commissioner Aaron Todd,
Here.
Commissioner Ashley Connolly,
Present.
Commissioner Derek Farage.
Here. Perfect. Moving down to item 4, oral communication. This is an opportunity for citizens to present on comments not related to agenda items. It doesn't look like we have any tonight. So moving on to item 5, consent calendar. We're going to vote on these consent items separately. Michael, I don't know if you want to elaborate.
Sure, just as a quick explanatory note, because we had 2 commissioners that were not on the Planning Commission at the time of the October 2024 Planning Commission meeting. I understand, watched the meetings for the October, and maybe if they could just confirm for the record that they've watched those before they vote on the minutes.
Yes, I watched it.
Okay.
Yes, I can confirm I watched.
Okay, thank you both. That's necessary to have a quorum of the Planning Commission for the minutes vote, since we wouldn't have that otherwise. Thank you both.
Perfect. All right. Voting first on item 5A.
I'll make a motion to approve item 5A.
Have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, passes 4-0. Item 5B, this is the March Planning Commission regular meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
A second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, passes 4-0. Moving on to item 6, public hearing 6A, consideration of zoning ordinance text amendment 24-02 and zoning change 24-01 to implement 2021 to 2029 housing element actions 3-1 and multifamily dwelling objective design standards. All right, at this time, we will have staff presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair and Planning Commission, City of Fillmore. I'll be presenting this item. This is the housing element actions, which you heard at the last Planning Commission meeting. And we got some of your comments at the last meeting, and we incorporated those to the extent we could into the latest zoning ordinance text amendment. And I just would like to reiterate that this has been a lengthy process, although you've only seen it now for the second time. It's been in the works since 2021. And we are urgently needing to get it through to City Council and then off to the state HCD so that they can certify our housing element and get us out of this constraint with builder's remedy and those kinds of things. I have talked with HCD. They check in with us periodically to ask status. So they are definitely tracking it. So tonight we're looking for an action to move this forward either way. Okay. So I'll just give you a brief summary. Again, this is the housing element actions. The housing element was reviewed by this body and through City Council numerous times. It's been posted on the website for public review. It's been through several reviews with the state HCD department, and it was conditionally certified so long as we complete some of the rezone actions. Rezone action 3-1 is to create the RMH2 zone, and that's in the neighborhoods just south of here along the highway between Santa Clara Street and SR 126. And action 3-2 is to create an housing overlay zone. We'll get into those in more detail. This is an overall map. The small pink properties are the overlay zone, and the small blue properties are the RMH2 zone. Zooming in a little more on the RMH2 zone, you can see those locations there just south of City Hall, on either side of Central. The RMH2 zone is to create a higher density housing product in this area. It's mostly commercial highway now, and some of the property owners in there who are residents, who have single-family homes, are in a non-conforming status and have a hard time upgrading or remodeling or rebuilding their homes. And this ordinance would render them legal, basically, or it would allow them the ability to do ordinary remodels and rebuilds and ADUs and everything else that you would normally get in a residential zone. Being that it's a commercial highway, we're limiting those constraints under the zoning. And all your ordinary uses that are allowed in residential zones, such as schools and churches, those things would all still apply here. Summarized in red, so this is the land use table, and this is in our ordinance. So all of the ones that are in black, but for the HO zone, are existing, and the RPD MH2 is the subject at the moment. So those are some of the design standards, and we made a few changes per the last discussion, and in doing some of the massing analysis, there was concern about the aesthetics and the massing and how that would affect the character of the residential neighborhood. So we could do a 15-foot front setback, and that would also be consistent with the Mountain View Apartments project constructed by Mini Mansions that you see out there. So I looked at some of their parameters and saw that these properties would allow the same type of development, and so we're able to go to 15 feet and still make those densities. So that will allow a little bit of relief. We also added, you can see there more in bold, is the 5-foot additional setback for the third story. So structures would step back, and that allows for, again, a reduction in the massing, and it also allows for fire access. This is primarily a safety issue. The fire chief would like to have the ability to lean a ladder up and get on the second floor, be able to stand on the second floor, and then hoist another ladder up to get up on the roof of the third floor. So that allows for those types of dimensions. And again, the 10-foot additional on the third story provides some relief to neighboring properties. And then continuing down, these are some of the pre-existing changes. And I also wanted to note, it's not in red, but it's in bold. We could go to a 35-foot instead of 40. Many Mansions is just a hair under 35 feet. So we figure it works. Everybody seems to like that product. So if the commission would like that as a mitigating factor on some of the massing, we could do a 35-foot story versus a 40-foot story. The 40 feet would still apply to the residential high. And then the second main component of tonight's hearing is Action 3-2, which is the overlay zone. And the overlay zone was through the overlay zone identification process, there were properties throughout the city that have been vacant for many, many years and underutilized to some degree. And so the housing element identified those as opportunities to have more housing or allow more opportunities for housing developers. And those would allow a density of up to 24 units per acre. Those properties are identified here. There are 6 total. This one's up off B Street between 2nd and 3rd Street. This is on Sespe Avenue. And finally, this cluster here is off C Street and River. There are 3 parcels there. The overlay zone would still have the underlying zoning, so it would not replace the existing zoning. It would allow developers an opportunity to do residential should they not want to do the pre-existing zoning. And since we haven't had anything under the pre-existing zoning in ever, this allows more opportunity. The HO, the housing overlay standards, are listed there in red to the right. And you can see here the 24 units per acre density. And again, we applied those mitigating factors to the third story to give it additional 5 feet to step back. So it's in the HO zone. And again, seeing as how 35 feet works and still allows for 3-story, we would apply that same here. It's not bold, but that's second line down under the main building structure height. I don't know if you can see my cursor. That same standard could be applied here. Objective standards. So why do we do objective standards? Because it takes the guesswork out of housing development. And with the housing shortage that the state's identified, they're enacting state laws on routinely to strip away some of the local regulations and make it easier for developers, or at least make it more predictable in terms of what you're going to get from city review. So we have something called objective design standards that a developer can know up front what types of standards are going to be applied to their project, and that helps them pencil it out and see if they'll get the kind of return that they need for the money, and it takes the guesswork out and it speeds up the process. So while we have the new zoning to allow more residential uses, we also wanted to make sure that we have sufficient objective standards so that we can apply some standards as they come in and make sure we're still upholding the city's character and what seems to work here. So that's why we went about doing objective standards at the same time as these rezones. So the objectives design standards would go into the Fillmore Municipal Code. It's a new section, 6.04.0418, and it establishes those standards to regulate the intensity, the style, the layout, materials, landscaping, and overall just try to maintain the city's character and some of the things that the city of Fillmore has voiced as the style and design features that they would like to see. They're drawn from pre-existing approved documents as well as pre-approved projects, and also looking at what other cities have done throughout Southern California to adopt the same objective design standards. The objective design standards are written in detail after this slide, but I just wanted to get to the recommendations. Tonight's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing, adopt Planning Commission Resolution 251058, recommending City Council approve Zoning Ordinance Amendment 24-02 and Zone Change 24-01, implementing the 2021 to 2029 Housing Element Action 3-1 and 3-2 to change the zone designation of the parcels and adopt development standards specific to the residential development within these zones. Multifamily residential development objective design standards added to the Fillmore Municipal Code, multifamily dwelling objective design standards, and finding of exemption from CEQA. I just also wanted to note that there were comments made to staff about some of the objective design standards, and so I've highlighted some of those here. On access and parking, we added the bicycle parking as kind of a green building code type of a requirement. So it offers alternative modes of transportation. We clarified that the single-family homes would still have the minimum 2-car garage to help take the parking off the street. And we applied the decorative pavers. A strip of decorative permeable pavers could go in the alley-loaded developments along the rear. And that would delineate a pedestrian path as well as a place where you could park your trash cans and also allow for water to be percolated into the ground. Some of the other things I wanted to just point out when it comes to sort of the efficiency of the site, we have a robust requirement for shade trees, walkability, connectivity to the pedestrian pathways on and off site. It will comply with the water efficiency requirements, and most of the water runoff would be able to be handled on site. And those are some of just the main highlights of what we changed in the objective design standards based on the last discussion. And I'd be happy to go over those or take any feedback from you as you discuss the project. I'll leave you with the recommendations again on the screen.
Thank you. Any questions?
I've got one that I can think of for now regarding the landscape. Does the city require that any point or during construction or after the trees are planted, a warranty to where if a tree dies because of lack of care or anything, that it is to be replaced within a certain timeline? And the reason I ask is because over on Mountain View, trees have perished. They've replaced them since, but it took about 5 years to do. So I'm just curious if that is something that we could look at, if there's not, adding some type of verbiage to ensure that the looks stay as if it was day one.
Yeah, on the public right-of-way street trees, they do come with a warranty. Is it 1 year?
1 year.
Yeah, it's 1 year warranty. And we have a typical design standard for those. So hopefully through our efforts on Mountain View and then down in the bridges, we monitor for the health of the tree. Yeah.
Is that standard for 1 year, or is there?
It's standard for every project. So yes, they have a warranty, but they also have a bond. So when they die, we call the bond and we have them replaced. The trees in question that you're discussing on Mountain View, they died probably about a year after they were planted, so we missed that opportunity because they didn't die earlier. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, we have a bond to replace trees within a year,
Okay,
paid for by the developer.
okay. I just want to make sure that when stuff like this starts to come up, that we ensure and keep the integrity of the project looking as if it's continuous instead of something slacking off, but focus is added somewhere else.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so, this document, is it just, you changed the single-family dwelling?
Yes.
Permitted, and then,
We made an additional change that didn't make it into the Exhibit A, but it is written in the staff report. There was a discussion about, as I mentioned, the desire for homeowners to be able to make improvements to the homes without having to come up to code with everything. And so one of the ways that we address that is adding a footnote to the land use table. So under section L, single-family dwelling, the single-family dwelling is permitted. And then the footnote 1, if you look on the last page of the handout, that highlighted section just puts it in plain English to make it clear, because if you were having questions, we assume maybe others would at the same time. So I just wanted to add that into the table so that it's easily referenced. And it basically says that if you're legally constructed, so a home that was constructed pre the codes, you can go ahead and continue to maintain that use, and you can rebuild it, expand by 150 feet, and rebuild within those same dimensions and not have to come up to the requirements of setbacks and things like that. So long as the fire department's okay, we don't want to let a fire hazard go by. So that's just the one caveat there, that we will have the fire department take a look at it and just make sure they're okay with that, with what's existing.
and can you remind me, sorry, what does the D stand for in this?
Oh, Ds are for development permits. Those are a discretionary action.
Okay,
And Cs are conditional use permits. Those are also discretionary actions. Permitted means it's ministerial.
okay.
Yeah.
So I have some other questions.
Okay.
The builder's remedy issue that we talked about last time, where the state law allows for developers to like bypass our zoning and build low or lower income housing. Is that happening right now? Is that because we're not fully approved by HCD, is that this time period only?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe a developer could seek the builder's remedy to propose any kind of a development because the housing element hasn't been officially adopted.
Okay, even though it's been tentatively adopted, like you
Even though it's been
said,
conditional,
conditionally certified?
it's been conditionally certified, but it's not certified.
Okay. So it's like, that's an urgent issue?
So that's a primary urgent issue.
Are there any builder's remedy projects that are coming through to you right now?
We have not had any come to light, no, but it is posted on the state website now. They post the status of cities, so I think the community, development community is learning where to look for these kinds of things.
Okay,
Because the state's definitely broadcasting, who's in
Right.
compliant and who isn't. And so some of the sophisticated developers out there might try to,
Shoehorn
take
something.
advantage, yeah.
okay. Is there anything else that makes this urgent other than what we just talked about? Is there some funding or something that we're not going to get if we don't approve it by a certain deadline?
I believe there are low-income housing projects out there who are applying for funding and can't get the funding if the city doesn't have a certified housing element.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's one of the criteria, I guess, for this particular money.
But the city is not going to get money from the state or something, or there's not some consequence?
No.
There's not like a date, like if you don't do it by X date, this consequence
No,
happens?
the city itself would not lose out on any monies from the state at this point.
Okay,
But the only thing that would happen is a low-income housing developer who would give us housing numbers to meet our RENA might not be able to come forward. So our objective, of course, is to meet our RENA. So,
Right.
we wouldn't show that we're adding those numbers. So it would, for a developer to come in with the money and help us meet our numbers, that's the advantage.
okay.
Yeah.
If I could add real quickly to Brian's answer, I have a section of a letter that was sent by HCD to another city that kind of explains the importance of compliance with housing. I'm not going to say the name of the city or the specific letter, but I can
Yeah.
read that sort of from HCD's perspective.
Okay.
That might help answer that question. So the section of this particular letter is called Consequences of Lack of Compliance with State Housing Element Law. Housing availability is a critical issue with statewide implications, and most housing decisions occur at the local level. Housing elements are essential to developing a blueprint for growth and are a vital tool to address California's prolonged housing crisis. As such, state law has established clear penalties for local jurisdictions that fail to comply with state housing element law. First, non-compliance will result in ineligibility or delay in receiving state funds that require a compliant housing element as a prerequisite, including but not limited to the following. And then there's a list of 5 different programs that provide for state funding. Second, jurisdictions that do not meet their housing element requirements may face additional financial and legal ramifications. HCD may notify the California Office of the Attorney General, which may bring suit for violations of state housing element law. Further, statutes provide for court-imposed penalties for persistent noncompliance, including financial penalties. It explains the government code section establishes minimum fine of $10,000 per month and up to $100,000 per month. If a jurisdiction continues to remain non-compliant, a court can multiply the penalties up to a factor of 6. Other potential ramifications could include the loss of local land use authority to a court-appointed agent. So that's obvious. That second paragraph in particular is kind of like a worst-case scenario, and I've not heard that. But anyway, that's something that HCD is putting in writing to at least
warn.
one other city. Correct.
So question though, how late was this city? Like when was this warning issued?
I don't know in particular. This particular letter it was from 2022, and I'm not sure what their housing. It doesn't say what their housing element time period was, but this is for Fillmore. It's the 2021. They're the period starting in 2021.
So we're like 4 years.
So it's, so that's and practically speaking, it's kind of getting close to when the next like housing
Right.
element process, like
Starts,
preparation is gonna start. And then another practical consequence, the city wants to stay on 8-year cycles and not have HCD force that to be a shorter cycle. So
Okay.
that the city's having to do this every 4 years instead of every
Right.
8 years.
So
So that's sort of
Excuse me
another.
if I can just interject. Please note, the city of Fillmore submitted housing element drafts to HCD during this process about 4 or 5 times. So they would have it 6 to 8 months and then come back with a laundry list of corrections.
Okay.
So it wasn't like we just turned it in.
Right.
We've been turning it in since 2021 or earlier, 2018 or 19. And this is common. This is common for every single city. And we are late. But know this, we're done with the housing element.
Right,
You're reviewing a housing program.
right.
After these housing programs, we have more to come to you until 2029. And we're already starting the next housing element cycle right now.
Okay. So I guess also the motion or decisions made tonight, they have to incorporate both the zone change and the zone, the actual language and the objective standards. They both have to be approved or denied or whatever.
Yes.
They have to go together.
Yes.
Okay. And then, and then the CEQA exemption, that's only for the zone change. I think Derek might have asked this last time, but I just want to confirm that.
Correct.
Okay, and then since, you know, we talked about this landmark survey thing, last time, you know, I guess CEQA, I did some research into it. I just want you to confirm that, officially designated landmark, it doesn't need to be an officially designated landmark to be considered historically significant under CEQA. And I guess anything constructed, before, you know, constructed over 50 years ago, so 1975, would be eligible potentially, and have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis if there's any discretionary approval involved. I guess that's my question. It would have to be individually, because our survey doesn't even, I mean, our survey goes up to the 1930s because it was done 42 years ago, so we wouldn't have knowledge of what's there unless it's done case by case, right?
Of something that's been constructed since that survey was done?
Like, yeah, and assessed in terms of like the historical significance, because that survey only captures, I mean, at that point, saying something was historical meant that it was built before the 30s.
Right.
But now it's before 1975 for CEQA.
Okay, but I believe those studies looked at all of the homes regardless of that criteria for 45 years. When they did it in 83, they weren't differentiating between something being built pre-1930 versus later. I think they identified the ones in the study, but they did look at the whole neighborhood.
Right, but I mean, it's wouldn't be, I mean, I don't think you could use that survey for anything because it's 42 years old.
The survey's old, yeah. The construction in the neighborhoods has not changed. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any redevelopment of the home, so that what you see today is pretty close to what was in those studies.
Right, but
Yeah.
I mean, those studies are kind of outdated.
The studies are outdated.
We wouldn't have the full scope of what's there
Yes.
now, like even if I'm saying even like the things that were designated before necessarily are not, they may not be anymore because people have changed the materials, it doesn't have that historical integrity anymore.
Sure.
So then that would change to be removed, for example, whereas
Right.
something else that was built later that wasn't historically significant at that time,
Right.
it could be considered historically significant now, because 1975 is the threshold and not 1930.
Yeah, so, but since 1975, we would have record of that. And, but we haven't, I don't know that we haven't evaluated the historical significance of anything built post-1975. There hasn't been anything constructed that I'm aware of.
No, they're
Yeah.
not in that area.
Right.
But Ashley's really getting to, if in the future we have someone that wants to remodel, tear down, rebuild, per CEQA, we would look at the historical significance of that architecturally. And And I think that's the point that she's trying to make. And when we do that, we would look at this survey that was done, and it's outdated survey. But that's not our only source. We would continue further research. But I would caution you, I wouldn't rely upon CEQA, because CEQA's evolving and changing every single year. So I don't know what 2 years from CEQA will do. There's a lot of exemptions that get thrown in there, and then other things get added. But your point is, there's some architectural integrity that we're trying to retain.
Yeah, and my question would be like, because we don't have like a current survey, we'd have to, or you guys would have to, case by case, do the research for that project, if there is one that has, because I think it's only if it's discretionary approval too. It's not if it's under the permitted section, but I just wanted to, I guess, confirm that that is the case, which it
That's the
seems
case.
like it
Yeah.
is. Okay.
Yeah, if they come in with a ministerial change, most likely we wouldn't pick it up unless it was identified in a document somewhere.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, CEQA would only kick in if it's a discretionary project, and then we would have to there'd have to be a specific reason why we would do a study.
Well, it would have to be done if it's over 50 years old,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay.
So in that case, yes, we would look at it and evaluate. We could require the applicant have an expert, an architectural expert, take a preliminary look at it, and then send a letter saying whether they have identified anything that could be historically significant and therefore require a more detailed study. There could be that type of a dialogue that would happen. And then oftentimes, if that's the only issue under CEQA is the potential historic character, then they could produce a study, and then it could be incorporated into the remodel, whatever's recommended.
Like some mitigated measures. Currently, and I'm asking because I'm new, the CEQA initial studies, do they always come to Planning Commission?
Not always.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can we request that?
you could. Yeah.
Okay, and that would be in the later period?
Yeah, if it goes into like a negative declaration and then for sure, yes.
Okay, a negative
Yeah.
declaration saying that it's not impacting?
Yeah, a negative
the environment.
declaration basically says there's no potential for a significant environmental impact, and no mitigation measures are required.
That's the only time it would come to us?
A negative declaration.
So even, could we see it at the initial studies of CEQA portion?
We wouldn't bring it until the environmental document is prepared, and the initial study would be attached within the negative declaration. And that would
Okay.
all come to you as one package to adopt. We don't come with an initial study and distribute the initial study for everybody to review to see if there's an issue. We go through that process of initial study along with analysis of all the rest of the project. And then it comes to you after the initial study and after the environmental document's prepared for the initial study.
Okay,
So,
and
and it-
and it's not possible to see it sooner, I
No,
guess
it
is
has-
my question.
Not really, no.
Piecemealing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be a publicly
Yeah.
available type of document once it's prepared. I don't recall the section off the top of my head, but there's a Fillmore Municipal Code section where there's a table of types of projects that come to the Planning Commission. And so any of those types of projects that are being sent to the Planning Commission for review that have a CEQA action attached, the CEQA documents would all be
Right.
coming with the final approval documents at that time.
Okay,
Yeah, it comes at that time, and if you were to review the environmental document and initial study and bring up new issues and new concerns, then we would go back and reanalyze it or determine whether new studies are needed. So a negative declaration could be bumped up to a mitigated negative declaration. A mitigated negative declaration could be bumped up to an environmental impact report.
okay, got it, okay.
Yep.
To put it simply, yes, you see the initial
Yes.
studies.
Okay,
Yeah.
You do. You see every one of them in every environmental document we bring before you.
okay. But not every project?
Not
that has-
every
every
project
project.
gets an
Yeah.
environmental review at that in-depth. Some of them are exempt.
And, okay. And we wouldn't be able to challenge the exemption?
No.
Okay. Okay, those are all my questions.
Commissioner Derrick?
Yep, I just have a couple here. One for the overlaid properties for section 3 or action 3-2. Has there been any interest from any party about developing those sites?
Some developers have, periodically, they come and ask about in all of these sites.
Can you present those two right there, number 9 and number 10 slide? Brian, what you don't know, in the last 2 days on the number 10 slide, we have had a developer come forward to me.
On this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I just haven't had a chance to speak with you about it.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I mean, I
over
pass
the years,
SB all the time, and I see that big field. I'm like, oh, that'd be a fantastic place for multifamily, potentially low income or affordable housing.
yeah,
There.
it's very visible. I've probably in the past 5 years, I must have had half a dozen calls about it.
Okay.
Yep.
Then just my last question. Just want to make sure and clarify that the standard objectives or the objective standards that we're approving here are just for these overlay areas. They're not citywide, but they're going to be just specific to the 3-2 action.
No, the objective standards are for multifamily developments, so it's citywide
Okay.
for multifamily, yeah.
Okay, so the change, so I'm just reading your recommendation here. The change zone designation of identified parcels and adopt development standards specific to residential development within these zones. So it'll be for the MB or the RPD MH2 zones, which can be citywide. They're not going to be specific to just these 3 that have been identified in this.
Yes, and it goes on to say multifamily dwelling objective design standards.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted clarification on that.
Yes.
So
So-
to anywhere that's.
It applies to these zones, the HO and the RMH2, and any multifamily development, whether it be under residential high or a residential medium.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have just one more, Brian. On the third page of the packet that you handed out, the highlighted part, the legally constructed existing family dwellings in RMH2 zone.
Yeah.
Does that verbiage have anything to do with ADU? Where it talks about the expansion up to 150 square foot beyond the existing physical dimensions? Is that a way around?
Yeah, no, the ADU is existing. So any of these residential lots could do an ADU under ADU law, not affected by this at all. But what you're seeing is the 150 feet is also what's in the ADU law. So if you're remodeling a pre-existing structure, you can add on 150 square feet to that while you're remodeling. So it applies to a legally constructed primary house. You can add 150 feet. And that 150 feet is already in the ADU law, which is not affected tonight.
Okay, so, and
Yeah.
just for clarification on that, if this expansion occurs, it would require city approval?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions? Good. All right, can I open the public hearing? We don't have any speakers, no speaker cards, no one? All right, I'm gonna formally close the public hearing and open it up for commissioner discussion.
I have a little presentation that I can share.
Okay.
I think.
Use the mouse.
Thank you. So, I just want to, I guess my comments I want to preface with, I think that, in my reading of the objective standards, I thought they were good and followable, and in general, I, agree with everything in there. And as an architect, I would understand and be able to make something with that. But there is one item that I wanted to point out, and that's compatibility. And I think Brian, he did talk about a little bit with the lowering it to 35 feet as the maximum height, and then increasing the setback of the front yard to 15 feet. But I just, I took an example house, like this house on Olive Street, and I did a little sun study myself. And I just want to talk a little bit about like height and massing in terms of compatibility. So let's say this is our subject house, and this is all like oriented to north and actually geolocated for our city, and I actually modeled everything, the street and the heights and everything. So if you see here, at 6 a.m., this is at the winter solstice, December 21st. If you have a bunch of houses that are about the same size, it's not really that different than if you had a multifamily dwelling next to you. This is with the 10-foot setback on the side yard, and then the additional 5 feet at the third story, which is what the code calls for right now. You can see it's not that different, right? Like most of the site is in shade. Maybe the front part of the house and the site is in the sun. But once you get to noon, this is the scenario with all little houses. You can see that the roofs are entirely in sun, and the majority of the site is also in sunlight. But if you look here at, if you had a, multifamily next to you, now the situation is your entire lot is in shade. And this is from noon basically onward. So this is at 3 p.m. You can see that, again, the entire house and most of the site is in shade. And I mean, what's so wrong with shade, right? Like, it's hot here, we want to have shade, we promote shade trees, like, we like this, right? But, when your house is in shade all day, basically, and your whole lot is in shade all day, it changes, your plants, they can't survive. If your kids are playing outside, during the winter months, it's cold. There's no sunlight, and then heating your house all of a sudden becomes really expensive. And then on top of that, if you have solar panels or you're thinking about getting solar panels, forget it, because now your south-facing roof in this scenario, it's not viable anymore. So, the reason I was asking these questions earlier about like, what's our deadline, what's the urgency, like, do we have time for one more round where, I guess this would be tying into my motion that, we come back one more round with some standards about compatibility in the scenario of a multifamily dwelling being built next to a single family residence, because that's not a usual scenario. You wouldn't generally see that. They're right next to each other. And I think there needs to be some special language that helps reinforce, massing and setback compatibility to not harm, structures that are existing or new, if it's a new house, right adjacent. So that's my comments on that. And then going back to the CEQA, so I don't know if everybody, I'm sure you guys all know, but I'm just going to say it again. So CEQA is a state law that requires public agencies to identify and disclose potential environmental impacts of their actions to avoid and mitigate those impacts if feasible. This includes impacts on cultural or historical resources. So the city right now is operating on a cultural heritage survey done when Ronald Reagan was president. It was done with a film camera and a typewriter before the internet was invented. So it's outdated, is what I'm trying to say, and most likely inaccurate. And I don't think it's common practice to use 42-year-old reports as a basis to make recommendations on. For example, Fillmore High School, it wasn't in the 1983 survey, but it became eligible as a resource in 1994, and I think everyone would agree that that's something that we would want to protect. So basically, if there's no updated survey, each parcel, like we were talking about before, in the rezoned area would need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis for historic, resource qualities. In just to conform with CEQA. And with that information in mind, I just want to go to something that was on the staff report. There was a statement made on page 8, and it says, "It can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the adoption of the zoning changes and amendments to the Fillmore Municipal Code implementing the housing element would have a significant effect on the environment directly or indirectly." So for me, in this case, that CEQA exemption that states that there is no possibility of a significant effect is not consistent with CEQA, as the zoning can have an effect on historic resources. And since we have no idea if there are historic resources in the area because our report is outdated, I just find that statement to be false. But yeah, I mean, my motion, I guess should I make a motion now or should I wait?
I think it will keep continued discussion among
Okay.
the other commissioners. Derek? Anything?
I mean, I'm always iffy when it comes to the larger buildings around single family locations, especially with the many mansions project where the neighbors next door literally saw the concrete wall right out their window. So I would agree that maybe one more round with this so we can get more discussion out and a little more awareness out to see what others think of it as well, because I know where I live, we run into somewhat of this issue, but the winter Solis kind of caught me off guard, so I'd like to look into it a little bit more before I can make like a firm decision on that as well. And thank you for sharing that, because it's good to see the comparison.
I guess really my only concern is after the reading of that letter from the other city is it does sound like there could be financial penalties against the city. If not that, other developers who are looking to get grants to potentially build affordable housing. HUD has a lot of those requirements that if your city doesn't have X, Y, and Z, or any type of matching funds and things like that, that they won't get those grants. So that would be a concern of mine for prolonging it. I'm torn with this, with the 40-foot as well. My only issue with that is because Fillmore's smaller area of influence is diminishing with, agriculture not being able to be built on. Infilling for housing is kind of where our potential affordable housing would be, and going up is kind of where we have to think about. We can't expand as they did back in the the 50s, the 60s. Everybody's got a half acre of land. That's not economically feasible to put one piece of property on half an acre anymore. So building up, you can still get your 2,500, 3,000 square foot homes with multiple stories. But again, with this, it's like, well, right, if I have solar panels on, this house, there goes $30,000-$40,000 that I just invested in my house. So again, I'm kind of torn of, we're coming up on a deadline, and prolonging it can't affect the city. So
I would agree with you on that I understand another round or continuing it for another month. I would question on the massing sort of the shadowing, how far of a setback would it take for no shadowing to occur on a house next to it?
Right, I mean, that's the question, and I think there has to be a study done to show, and actually qualify the standards that we're approving. So, I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, right here, I'm showing the 10-foot setback for
Yeah.
this massing. Maybe if it was 15 feet, it would make a difference. I also, pulled up this is from Pasadena's code, where they have multifamily, it's specifically this situation, multifamily projects adjacent to single-family districts. And they have something called an encroachment plane, where at every story you have to step back 5 feet. So you're basically channeling the light down, it potentially could make a difference with how much sunlight your house could get. So I'm not advocating for prolonging it for months and months. I find issues with the CEQA analysis, and I also find issues with the historical stuff, but I'm willing to, move forward and approve this. I just want to see one more round of compatibility, language incorporated, whether it's setbacks or step backs or, something requiring shadow studies, something like that.
Could we make those recommendations and still forward it on to council?
I think correct. I think that would be the way to have those specific recommendations be incorporated into the recommendation to council, so that it's moving forward. The critical piece really is that it's moving forward to city council, and then city council can take that feedback. And then it's letting council make the decision about HCD if they wanted to direct staff to make those changes to the ordinance, or if they just wanted to adopt it as is, direct staff to follow up on those sections of the code to incorporate those changes, or maybe the decision would be to let it go as is. So I think what the commissioner just described would be the way to do, just so it's at least move forward, but there's still a way to incorporate those recommendations.
Rather than moving to continue the matter until next time.
Correct.
And reviewing it again and then approving it.
Correct. In this particular case, there's a very unusual, I think, that I'd be pushing this hard, that it go forward to city council for a legislative type of council decision, but there is a timing element with this that's important. But there is a way to do that, I think, to get your comment, if that's the planning commission's consensus direction, those comments can be passed on to city council as part of the planning commission recommendations.
So, and if we are able to also make recommendations beyond that, can we make a recommendation that the city council consider doing another cultural heritage survey, so each property doesn't have to be evaluated individually for CEQA?
If that's appropriate for part of it, I don't see how it fits in with it. If it's something that does fit in with this rezoning, then this would be the time to do it. I'm not sure if it does. Maybe it does, and I'm just not following.
Well, there were I highlighted last time that there were, I don't know, more than 10 of the parcels that were included in the 1983 survey. But basically, we've discussed that that's inaccurate and outdated because it's 42 years old, and now things built after before 1975 are considered historic and could potentially be assets under CEQA. So that's the only reason. I mean, I think it's just a waste of time and money for the staff to have to review each parcel individually instead of doing an overall survey that would bring light to what's historical and needs to be protected, in addition to, you wouldn't have to do CEQA analysis for every parcel individually when the projects come up.
So you might be saying, so for council to consider the potential historical qualities of existing residences, including potentially through
Another cultural heritage, an updated survey.
Okay, so it could just be a one sentence type of recommendation to council, and then they can make the.
So it would be
final decision.
both that and the compatibility with between multifamily and single family.
With the shading issue.
With the shading issue, so setbacks and step backs.
Yeah, so that could be incorporated into the planning commission recommendation. So what it would the specific form that it might take is we'd probably add that would be, if the planning commission adopted, voted to approve that. What we would probably be doing then would be tweaking the language of the planning commission resolution, which I will get in front of me, so I have that.
So to come up,
Okay.
so if we were to potentially put in some language to try to craft a design standard for this, for council, would you be happy with something? I did sort of a very basic massing where I plugged in the 35 feet. And so this is, pretty ugly, but it's obviously not what it's gonna look like. It's the same height as many mansions across the street. So obviously the massing looks a lot worse. But when I go through this exercise, there is enough space when you plug in the parameters for parking in the open space to be flexible on the third story in terms of where they place it. So we could possibly consider some kind of language to the effect of buildings shall be oriented in a north-south direction to the extent feasible to ensure solar accessibility to neighboring residents, something to that effect. So maximize orientation of the structure, of third-story structure, and then that would have something that staff could look at sort of objectively to.
I guess I don't see how orientation north-south would help the situation.
Okay.
I'm just, if you can clarify that.
One other thing that I should mention, and maybe this gets to what Brian was trying to suggest, in terms of those shading requirements that you were talking about, it seemed to me like it might be take more than just tweaking some of the language that's like in the objective standards now that we could come up with on the fly. And so that was the basis for having council consider that further, that it would really take.
Okay.
If it's something that was sort of like an objective standard
Then we
that
can
was
just
like a
plug
quick,
it in.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
We would just plug it. It seems like a more complicated
Yeah.
thing than just.
I would recommend making those additional recommendations and then pushing it forward to council, let them,
And I'd get behind that.
yeah.
Okay, so maybe what we could do, if that's kind of the planning commission consensus, then we could try to sketch out what the specific recommendations are to include in the resolution. And then that could also probably be like a paragraph in the staff report that goes to the city council that in addition to the ordinance that's here, the planning commission had the following recommendations for council to consider.
Okay.
So the first item was, and it sounds like there's planning commission consensus on considering is massing the correct technical term to deal with the shading?
Yeah, I would say compatibility in massing. And I don't know, right now, in the application, do you require solar studies of any kind?
We don't,
Okay. And
but we do focus on compatibility. When you're done with your discussion and after this, you go through your motion, I'll explain how the planning commission reviewed a project, exactly what you're describing right now in these shadings, and I think you'll be very pleased with how planning commission reviews projects.
Okay.
And I'll try coming up with some language for the resolution, and then you can tell me if that kind of captures what the intent is. So what we would be doing would be having section 3 of the resolution read, the planning commission hereby recommends that the Fillmore City Council adopt zoning ordinance amendment 24-02 attached hereto in draft form exhibit A with or maybe subject to the following recommendations. And then number one would be consider compatibility and massing issues for adjacent multifamily and single-family dwellings to mitigate shading impacts. Does that capture the issue fairly? Okay, so that was that one. And then for the historic resource, it was the second item.
And I can read you what I wrote if that helps.
Sure, yeah, maybe read that and then I'll.
Sure. So I just said recommend that City Council get a renewed cultural heritage survey of Fillmore done in order to identify and protect our historical resources, as the last survey we referenced today is outdated, antiquated, and inaccurate, and will not be helpful in CEQA review, as anything built prior to 1975 would now potentially be identified as historical asset.
Okay, some of that language I would probably want to
Yeah.
leave out, but I think can capture the intent still. So would it be consider ways to preserve existing
Wouldn't it just be planning commission recommends, for consideration and performing an updated
Cultural heritage
cultural
survey.
heritage survey?
Yeah, what I was thinking was something, and it's ultimately up to the planning commission on the.
I don't think it's only about preserving, though. It's also about identifying others that we
Okay.
don't know about, because, like I said, when it was conducted, they only thought it was 1983. So historic was 1930 kind of cut off. Now it's 1975. So like, you know, the post-World War II boom, like, you know, all sorts of different, you know, all the murals, all the water and power buildings, like all those buildings were done way after 1930. And those things are things we'd want to protect now. So not that we have that in the area specifically, but I'm just saying there's potential other assets that we don't know.
Okay, let me try that. So that the recommendation would be that the city council consider conducting a new cultural resources study to identify and preserve cultural and historic resources? Is
Yeah, I mean, I think they called it a cultural heritage survey, but I don't know if it has to be called that.
Okay. Does that,
Yeah.
does
Can you
that
repeat it
fairly
again? I'm
capture?
sorry. Say it one more time.
That, so this number 2 recommendation would be that the city council consider conducting a new cultural resources study to identify and preserve cultural/historic resources.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to include anything about CEQA, because if there is CEQA involved with the project, anything before 1975 has to be reviewed.
Is there any definition of what would be considered historical? Are we talking solely housing? Is it?
No, it can be anything. It can be any kind of building can be considered historical, and it can be because the architecture is historical. You know, somebody who lived there was historical, like, you know, Cesar Chavez was born in this house, you know, that kind of thing. Or, you know, it's like something to do with like the development of a place, or like somebody was telling me, like, there's a historical district that's based on this. These are the first homes that had air conditioning in California. I mean, that's, you know, maybe extreme, but I'm just saying, like, it could be a lot of different things that can make it historical, and it doesn't have to be a landmark to be historical.
I would say, so with the CEQA, I don't want to open the door too much to it. potential challenges on that type of ground, but it could, we could maybe do something like consider, you know, consider further CEQA analysis, or if it's more with respect to future, I guess with respect to future projects, CEQA would apply as it applies anyway, so.
Well, if they do the survey and it is identified as a historical, then CEQA already has something built into it that it has to be reviewed, right?
Well, CEQA, I mean, from my understanding, and I'm sure Kevin and Brian know much more about this than I do, but if it's 1975 and before, you know, then you have to start looking, okay, is this a historical asset of some kind? And it doesn't mean it's a landmark necessarily, and it doesn't mean that it's been on some register before. You're reviewing it based on the, you know, the fact that it's before 1975, and starting from that basis, okay, was Cesar Chavez born here? Was, you know, this designed by Green and Green? You know, like something like that. And you'd have to do that on every parcel. If there is just, you know, like, let's say somebody buys a bunch of parcels and they want to build a multifamily residential building there, but there's something about the project that makes it have discretionary approval, immediately CEQA is triggered, and then you have to do that analysis.
And so if we already have, we have an updated survey, then they would already have that information and wouldn't
Right.
have to do it
Correct.
specifically for that parcel, which
Right.
is going to potentially increase cost,
And staff time.
staff time.
I think our recommendation for an updated survey should be
Should cover
sufficient
that.
enough. I don't think we need to add the language of CEQA. I think, I agree with council that it could potentially open the door for challenges
Challenges by,
to the city,
oh, okay, by the public, you're saying.
or even
Or the
past
builder.
developers.
Oh, okay.
There tend to be, I understand what you're getting at, but and ultimately it's the planning commission's decision on what to include in the recommendation.
I think our intent's there with that verbiage.
Yeah, I understand, yeah. I understand the CEQA point,
Yeah,
I
it's
think we
not
just
just
don't-
like, oh, I want to save the house, you know, it's, you know what I mean? It's actually got a practical application.
yeah. My concern is just from I don't know that practically this would happen if there were anybody that wanted to challenge on CEQA, we just wouldn't want to give them a toehold with that type
Okay.
of thing as part of the, I understand your concern though.
Okay.
But, I mean, the planning commission's the deciding, or the recommending body in this case to the city council though.
So anyone want to take a shot at the motion?
I'll make that the first motion here. So, I move to adopt, planning commission, resolution 25-1058, to approve the zoning ordinance, 2402 and 2401, for action 3-1 and action, 3-2, with the two recommendations of, to the council to, if you could just repeat.
And so the specific recommendations that would be included in section 3 of the planning commission resolution would be: number 1, that the city council consider compatibility and massing issues for adjacent multifamily and single family dwellings to mitigate shading impacts, and then number 2, that the city council consider conducting a new cultural resources study to identify and preserve cultural historic resources in the zoning, impacted zoning areas here.
Yeah. So that would be my motion with those two recommendations.
Can I just clarify though, it's not only in the zoning areas, it would be, I would think it needs to apply citywide, this cultural heritage survey, because I don't think it makes sense just to survey.
Right.
I think he's
Okay.
just saying that that's the area it impacts is for
Yes,
this.
Okay.
For this specific resolution.
Okay.
Yeah, I can leave that. I mean, I think that here, since we're only rezoning those, it kind of makes sense to tie to that. I suppose it doesn't need to, and ultimately it's council's decision what they,
Because it'd probably
with
be
this
cheaper
anyway.
for them to do the entire city instead of just doing
Piecemeal.
one and
Yeah.
piecemeal it. But, I mean, that would be up to council and,
my concern would it be, and again, it's a planning commission decision as a group, but if it's sort of rezoning particular properties and then the planning commission is recommending do a citywide study for properties that might not be impacted by this.
well, we can
That
just
is-
leave it as the recommendation is to, conduct a new heritage study.
And so leave out the zoning,
Yeah, I would just
Okay.
leave it there.
okay. Okay, so those are the two specific recommendations then. And then also with including the,
The updated
Red line.
language
Change.
on the footnote.
changes that Brian
And the
circulated.
35 and the 15-foot, the 35 height and the 15-foot setback. That he showed today.
Okay, and Brian, is that already built into the?
Yeah,
ordinance
that's
draft?
in.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Are we good? Should we repeat it, or
I think,
someone need to repeat the motion?
I think so, so we had is to approve the resolution, subject to the two
two
planning commission.
additional recommendations.
Recommendations that I just read as the motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second, oh. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 4-0. All right, moving on to item 8, report and communication, 8A, Planning Commission. Any commissioners have any briefs?
I just had one thing I wanted to bring up. I don't know if council has talked about it, but I have started seeing a lot more things about the new fire severity maps from CAL FIRE. I know there's going to be potentially some new zoning or building requirements for that, but I didn't know if anything has been brought up regarding it.
The maps have been published, and the city of Fillmore went from 330 residential units up to 830. When the city of Fillmore adopts the new building codes in December, it will include how we mitigate for new structures and room additions for those areas. So there's going to be new building codes for those particular areas, how you address fire. And we already have an idea of what they are. We're in a workshop right now. And tonight is a workshop at Rio Vista Park. And I think last week we had one. I attended that one. So it's describing things like, we shouldn't have landscape planters up against the buildings if you have for buildings in that particular area, and box the eaves and those kinds of things. This will go to the city council, I think in June or July.
Okay.
We're in the public workshop phase right now.
Yeah, I did notice on the 3rd and tonight, there were multiple things. It's just, it was concerning when I saw the map,
Yeah,
huge
the increase.
it looks
So
about
what-
60% more.
Isn't it, that's everybody's reaction, especially if you live in the area. And then you think, well, my insurance rate's gonna go through the roof, right?
Yeah. And
Then-
that's one of my concerns, not just
Yeah.
personally, but Fillmore is a low-income city. And, I mean, you're talking about potentially $4,000 or $5,000 a year for fire insurance, just for fire insurance, so, we'll definitely, hopefully, good things come out of these, workshops, and, the council, hopefully,
Is one of the items or requirements for these new houses being built in fire zones going to be the fire-resistant paint that they've got?
I don't know all the codes, so they're looking at materials. I'm not sure if paint is on there. I don't know all the codes yet, and they're still developing some of them, right? I am witnessing, I don't know if it'll be final, but wooden fences probably won't even be allowed in there, new wooden fences. They have on video a fence that caught on fire just because of the heat, and that wooden fence burned all the way to the residential unit and caught the residential unit on fire. I mean, you're looking at really high winds and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, I'm not sure of all of the materials and requirements and design yet,
All right,
but it's gonna be noticeable.
okay, yeah, because I know like vinyl is a hot topic with it melting and falling over onto the wooden
Imagine
structures.
vinyl windows, right? So what they have on, they have video of vinyl windows that pop out, and now all the heat is blown into the house.
I mean, cars caught on fire.
Yeah.
The metal caught on
Right.
fire. So it's just unusual, but is there any consideration to like not allowing new development and very high fire severity at all?
No, it's mitigated. We go through mitigation processes.
Okay.
Any other? All right, Planning Community Development Director report, item 8B. Kevin?
I do have just a couple of things. The Veterans Memorial Building, you should know, was red tagged by the city a few years ago. And then, because of, roof leaks and other issues, there's below, the building is below, building standards. The Veterans Memorial Board responded by seeking a grant, and they received a grant. And through the last 2 to 3 years, they've been pursuing the remodel of the Veterans Memorial Building. We issued a building permit today for just some of the demolition, and they're seeking one more permit number, not from the city of Fillmore, but from one other entity. Once that's done, you're gonna begin seeing some interior demolition occurring. It's gonna be a very long process. It could take 2 to 3 years for remodeling. But just know the Veterans Memorial the Veterans Memorial Building is beginning, and it'll take a while. Your discussions tonight regarding compatibility on massing and scale, that was tested by to this group on the Fillmore Terrace project, and it was denied because of compatibility. In fact, the exact images showed tonight was as if it came from that particular project, and that resulted in that project having 100% redesign. That developer listened to the commission, and we have a whole brand new project because of that. The Creekside development is being graded right now, and it will probably grade for the next 3 or 4 months. There's still a lot of grading that will occur. I know there are questions in the community, how long is that gonna take to grade? There's a lot of grading, and it's not easy, a lot of boulders. And then the last thing I'd like to say is we have had a lot of complaints recently on food vendors. We are doing something about it. It seems like we aren't, because you see more pop up. There are 4 food vendors, and then there are 2 additional ones that occur on the weekend. So there's a total of 6 on the weekends. We'll be doing code enforcement on those. City staff did present an update to the city council for the very first time, I think on April the 6th. You're welcome to take a look at it. I went in detail about food vendors. If people do have complaints on food vendors, please submit them to the building department or planning department. And I will receive those and we will investigate those, and we are. It may seem like we're not, but it's time consuming on the code enforcement end to make sure we do it properly.
You said April 6th?
I think it was April 6th, the last city council meeting. So I gave there's a 25-minute presentation about the negative things on some of these food vendors that you'll see. Take any questions you may have. I'll answer anything you have. Questions?
It's just pertaining to those items that you just talked about?
Yeah, no, you can ask any questions you may have. Anything about projects. Usually I just talk about projects that's moving forward.
There's a project on Palm Street, right, across from the transit station?
It's called Fillmore Terrace
Okay,
by
and,
People Self-Help.
okay. And there's like one house that's still there?
There's one house, and they're required by federal law, and they're required through the approval process that those people would need to be relocated.
Okay,
And so that project includes a relocation plan. So
okay,
it's a thick plan.
okay, okay.
It was submitted, and it's complicated and detailed.
Has that one been approved?
Yes.
Okay.
So it went to the planning commission. The planning commission said, no, we deny it. Or we
Because of the
recommend you
building.
totally change it, because if you actually showed building and massing scalings, the project was designed exactly like that. 3-story concrete block, one full city block, and the planning commission said, no way, no how. And as I mentioned before, it's totally redesigned. This is not at all like what it was before. So there are new laws on affordable housing, and one of the laws states that if a project complies with the zoning and general plan, and it's an affordable project, it does not go to the planning commission, it does not go to the city council, and there's no environmental review, and there's no public hearing. It's called ministerial. I approved it. So it was submitted to me, and I reviewed it for about a year.
With the redesign.
With a total redesign. New architecture, new layout, went through all department heads, departments. We asked for a lot of redesign. There was a lot of comments. The developer did a good job on redesigning everything. And if you did not make the decision tonight like you did on the housing, this was one of the projects that was seeking state funding, where you could jeopardize that project. We're on plan check number 3. It looks pretty good. They'll make all the corrections, but it is a state-funded project. It's about a $42 million project.
So when you're saying like you've gone through all these rounds of redesign and the ministerial review,
Mm-hmm.
so, but before that it was discretionary somehow?
It was discretionary because it wasn't complying with the ordinance.
I just don't want to get into too detailed of a
Okay.
discussion
Yeah.
since it's not an agenda. But Kevin can answer any independent of the planning commission, meaning if there are questions about a project, Kevin can answer
Okay.
those independently.
You see the images that Brian's showing?
Yeah.
That's the project.
Okay,
And you don't see the before picture.
right,
It's a nice project.
yeah. that is-
Everyone's gonna like it.
So some of these projects like this, or even some of that are in the residential or the highway zone, are they gonna be at some point required to have the, charging stations, put into them? Like,
There is a state law on charging stations.
Okay,
I can't remember what it is, and that's evolving too. So, I never try to memorize these laws because they change like every 6 months. On the project you just see, there's gonna be 6 charging stations.
okay, I asked because I thought I had heard something about the Baldwin Shopping Center possibly getting, or trying to apply for charging stations or something like that.
Oh,
But
Yeah, I haven't
I don't
heard
know. Okay, thank you.
Any others? All right, with that, we'll adjourn the planning commission, adjourn to the regular planning commission scheduled for May 21st, 2025 at 6:30 in City Council Chambers, 250 Central Avenue, Fillmore, California.